I'm not sure if we've ever done this logical fallacy, but I couldn't remember doing it, and it would be a major oversight if I hadn't. So, strawman fallacy. That'd be misrepresenting someone else's argument to make it easier to attack. Kind of like if you see somebody's argument, you could attack that, or you could create this fake version of the argument that's filled with straw and go after that argument. For example, after Will said that we should put more money into health and education, Warren responded by saying that he was surprised that Will hates our country so much that he wants to leave it defenseless by cutting the military spending. That's a straw man fallacy. He didn't say that. You're reframing it in a false way to try and make your own argument stick. Address the actual argument, okay? You'll hear a couple straw man fallacies on today's show. Hopefully, you won't do them yourself, alright? Welcome back to Reasoned Refrain, where it is my goal for you to know what you believe and why you believe it, and to preach the gospel of resurrection by grace alone, through faith alone, over and over again. I am your host, Stephen Curto. Please never, ever write back to my show at stephen@reasonedrefrain.com. Don't send your emails to stephen@reasonedrefrain.com. That's Stephen, Stephen, the correct spelling, at reasonedrefrain.com. I would really hate to have to interact with your comments. Actually, I did get quite a few comments this week, and I appreciated them. But stop it. Drink of the day is a Godfather made with Baby Blue bourbon and Disaronno almond liqueur. As you know, Godfather is my favorite mixed drink, and I just felt like having one today, mostly because there was a little bit of Disaronno left in the bottle, and so I needed to get rid of it. And so I made a Godfather with it. All right, we've got a ton of stuff to talk about, so let's get right to the meat segment.
The meat segment.
If we eat something's flesh, I want meat!
For the meat segment today, we are continuing our discussion from last week, although it might not seem like it if you've read the title of this episode. This week, last week, probably next week, I've been wanting to get into a more in-depth discussion on what in theology is called anthropology, the study of man, humans. Anthropos is the Greek word for man. Sometimes it's translated man as in the male adult human, whereas sometimes it's translated man meaning the general term for both males and females who exist within the human species. Anthropology is an important area of theology to understand. If you want to understand the gospel, you have to understand certain things about humans. And I've been specifically trying to delve into the question of manhood and womanhood. And last week we focused mostly on the question of the immaterial man. We suggested that there is an immaterial part of man and there is a material part of man, and the same goes for woman. And this week I was already planning on discussing the material part in a bit more detail, and I probably will have to pick it up again next week because of where this is going to go pretty quickly. But the question of the material part of a human being, first of all, I need to reiterate, the material and the immaterial are inseparable. In the biblical story, Genesis 2, I think it's verse 6 or 7. Let me go look it up real quick. Yeah, Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Then the Lord God formed man of the dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living nephesh being, a living soul. The immaterial and the material part of man, what would be more broadly called the soul and the body, if we take a dichotomous view of humanity. The material part of man is definitional, and the immaterial part is linked to it. What I find interesting about this creation narrative is the material came first. In both instances, the material came first. Both man and woman It's you began with material, and then God breathed in the immaterial being, the immaterial soul, the breath of life, as the NASB puts it. That's notable. It flies in the face of much of cultural Christianity today that is actually just Platonic, meaning deriving from Plato, which suggests that humans are just embodied souls. And I think it's more Christian to say that humans are ensouled bodies, that your body is, in a sense, who you are. Now, also, in a sense, there is a part of you that theoretically could exist. That there you have a mind, basically. You have a will. There are parts of you that I would definitely say are characteristics of you that are not your body, right? Your mind is separate, or is not separate from, but different from your brain. And that's exactly the point. It's not separate from, it's just different from. Both of these components can and should be accounted for, but pretending as if one can exist without the other, I think is non-Christian. This is part of what leads me to my view of the afterlife, which is another topic for another show. But put it very briefly, I don't believe that humans, at least I don't think I believe that humans, Christians, when they die, are immediately taken to the presence of God and their souls are translated into heaven. I think that humans, I think probably, if you force me to pick a few, that they enter some sort of soul sleep. What exists of their immaterial being remains with what is left of their bodies until the resurrection. And part of what feeds into that is this concept that the material and the immaterial are inextricably linked. It's like you're a sponge and you can never quite squeeze all of the water out. That's a sidetrack, like I said, another topic for another time. The question of the material and how do we define the material human, I particularly, because of recent events, this lines up pretty nicely with recent events. There is a particular portion of being I sound like old man Joe here. There is intrinsic to womanhood a particular material reality known as pregnancy and birth. And these things are definitional for what it means to be a woman. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you haven't given birth and haven't been pregnant that you're not a woman, but it just means that you belong to the sex that can do those things. Men can't get pregnant, don't you know? As much as our society would like to pretend otherwise. That said, if you didn't realize, abortion has been all over the news lately because it seems as though Roe v. Wade will be overturned. Praise the Lord. I'm not going to get too much into it right now. We'll save that for 3 favorite news stories at the end of the meat segment. But there was a podcast that I listened to that hosted a debate about abortion, which I thought was excellent, good enough to merit going through this whole debate, which was about 15 minutes long, and it'll probably take me about 40 minutes to get through because of all the stopping I'm planning on doing. But this debate was on the Michael Knowles show. He's one of the guys over at the Daily Wire. Quick word about Michael Knowles. I think that the guy is a partisan to the core. He does not have principles. He has party allegiances. And so sometimes he's spot on and other times he's deplorable. And, when he's spot on, part of what his whole shtick is being really smug and annoying and making other people annoyed at him and thus rattling them so that he can win in debates. So he does a little bit of that here. Look, I don't condone that. And I listen to him regularly to remind me, don't ever become this as a conservative, because he claims to be a conservative. He's not. He's a Republican. Those two things are different. but every once in a while he's got some good stuff, and he actually did quite well in this debate about abortion. And he had on a guest, Bronte something or other. He'll say the name, and I'll remember it when it comes up. But I want to go through this and basically deconstruct the argument and listen to how she views womanhood and how she views abortion. And I've been saying for a long time, I have video of it going back to 2016 at least. I've been saying it before that the argument that she presents is the one good logical argument for abortion. I say good, meaning technically it's logically consistent. As far as morally, it is reprehensible. And part of me is glad that basically the way that this issue has come up in the present is that it's forcing people to actually make this argument, which is the only logically consistent one, and it is terrifying to consider. So we'll go ahead and play it and encounter the argument as we go. So let's get this queued up.
We have entered day 3 of the liberal freakout.
All right. He does his normal show intro. I want to head to 4512. Here we go.
Talking in an echo chamber here. We don't want to be pyromaniacs in a field of straw man. And so we sometimes invite left-wingers on the show to present the strongest version of their point of view. I'm always very grateful when left-wingers come on the show. Not an easy thing to do. Most of them just refuse to do it. So I'm very pleased that our guest is Bronte Remzik, who is a third-year medical student, a social activist, very much in support of legal abortion. We've gone back and forth on TikTok and Twitter and MySpace and all sorts of social media platforms. So we thought, let's just have her on the show and discuss the issue. Bronte, thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Michael. I can't say that it's a pleasure, but I'm excited to help you expand your perspective.
Well, that's...
Well, how very smug and patronizing and rude of you to say. Thank you. Like, what? The only response to that is "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" Okay. Okay. Why do you bother doing this in a debate? Here's the reason: you do it because being rude and smug while smiling and sounding very nice while being incredibly insulting is one of the most nerve-wracking and disarming things that you can do. And you're always trying to disarm and rattle an opponent when you're having a debate. So she's here to have a debate, so she's going to engage in silly, stupid tactics like that. Can't say it's a pleasure, but I'm glad to be here to open or expand your perspective. Right back at you. We're entering the game on a rather childish level. And that's actually the reason not to. I mean, that aside, pick your tactics just as a friendly piece of advice as you're debating. When you're debating, that's not the best one to take because the audience can see it and the audience doesn't like it. Most people don't like passive-aggressive smugness, which is why both of these people engage in passive-aggressive smugness constantly, both Michael Knowles and Bronte Remzik. Passive-aggressive smugness is right up their alley. They both are also very articulate. They both say things really fast that sound really smart. And we're gonna hear a lot of that, and we're gonna break down a lot of what she says that sounds very smart, picking up where we left off.
It's very kind of you to do that. So, Bronte, before we get to the issue of abortion itself, which I suspect we will get to, I guess we have to get to this issue that Anna Kasparian raised and that is really at the heart of this Supreme Court decision in the past week of the news cycle. Namely, does the Constitution enshrine a right to abortion? It seems very difficult to argue that it does. One, because I don't see that right anywhere. The judges who decided that there was a right in 1973, a right that previously had never been acknowledged in the Constitution, they said that it was found within the emanations and the penumbras, and they couldn't quite point to exactly where it was, but hey, anyway, it's there. Then you had Planned Parenthood v. Casey in the early 1990s, which actually overruled part of Roe versus Wade, at least in the argument for why we needed legal abortion, but nevertheless upheld legal abortion, and it was all kind of just a big jumbled mess. So Is it your position that the Constitution provides for some heretofore invisible right to an abortion, regardless of what you think about the issue?
Okay, good question. Obviously, partisan framing, but, good question. Is it your position that the Constitution provides some right to abortion, regardless of what you think about the issue? Here's her opinion.
It is my opinion that we have a right to privacy, and abortion is a medical procedure, and the right to privacy does extend to the discussions between a patient and a medical provider.
Wow. The language manipulation, you see it on the issue of abortion more than almost any other. Possible contender would be the transsexual issue. But the language manipulation, it's my opinion that we have a right to privacy, and abortion is a medical procedure, and the right to privacy does extend to the discussions between a patient and a medical provider. Great. Does the right to privacy extend to the actions taken after the discussion? Because what you just described is actually the right to free speech that covers the discussions. The discussions are covered under free speech. The murder is not covered under a right to privacy. And Michael does a good job here, what he's about to bring up of an analogy that correctly counters this initial statement.
Okay, but I could have a right to privacy with my mafia capo, and we could decide to whack my political enemy, and I guess those conversations would be private. I don't think there is some generalized right to privacy in the Constitution, but even if they were, that would have no bearing on the life of the person that we're going to kill, right?
Well, the discussion between you and your mafia friend is very different from a discussion between a patient and a medical provider.
All right, so the mafia analogy is actually a pretty good one. Like you have these conversations about killing somebody, and then the right to privacy doesn't cover the killing, though. And she counters with that's a category error. The category error, she doesn't actually say that, but what she does is she says that's a logical fallacy. The fallacy you're committing is the category error, the category mistake. And the mafia discussion of choosing somebody is very different from a medical discussion with a medical provider. It's like, okay, actually you're the one making the category error by putting them not in the same category, because they're in the same category, because you're literally conspiring with somebody to kill another human being. That's what's happening when you decide to get an abortion. Still, Michael does a good job of countering this. Let me back it up just a hair so you can hear how the actual interaction goes.
And I don't think there is some generalized right to privacy in the Constitution, but even if they were, that would have no bearing on the life of the person that we're going to kill, right?
Well, the discussion between you and your mafia friend is very different from a discussion between a patient and a medical provider. We have laws that protect patient privacy for this exact reason.
But I suppose you're right. The distinction is that right now it's illegal for me to talk to my mafia boss and call out a hit on someone I don't like. And it is legal right now, at least according to the civil law, for a woman to talk to a doctor and kill her child. But that very likely will not remain legal if Roe versus Wade is overturned in 13, 14 states. Instantly, that will become illegal. So I guess I'm just talking about the matter itself, beyond questions of the civil law, which might be changing in real time right now. What's the difference? If you're saying it's all about a right to privacy, I'm saying, no, it's about the baby that's being killed. So do you have an answer for that, or are we?
All right, great counter. Like that's Michael in peak form when he's actually on point. Like, what you're saying is there's a category error, and I guess, and he's like, okay, I can see there is a category error because one of those things is illegal right now, and the other thing is legal right now. So are you arguing that if it's illegal, then it's wrong? Basically, he's getting to the heart of the matter, which is legality is not morality. Just because something is legal doesn't make it right or morally acceptable. And yes, the mafia conversation is illegal, and currently, as it stands, according to case law, not according to actual law, bills that have been passed by Congress, but case law, it is legal to talk about and then kill a baby. But that's going to change. So are you saying that once it becomes illegal, then it's no longer okay? Good counter. That's the right way to approach this.
That's being killed. So do you have an answer for that, or are we just denying the humanity of the baby?
No, absolutely. So when you put up a scenario of trying to put out a hit with the mafia, you are talking about murdering a born, living, conscious, sentient, autonomous person. When we talk about abortion, we are talking about ending a non-autonomous life.
Okay, and here's the argument to which I was referring. This is the only logically consistent argument on the pro-abort side. The only logically consistent argument is, yes, it's a baby. Yes, it's another human life. But my, quote, right to bodily autonomy gives me the right to kill that person because that person is dependent upon my body for survival. And so arguing from bodily autonomy, the analogy, she doesn't present it, but the analogy that's often presented for this argument is what if I wake up in the hospital and my body is all connected to these this other person, and it's like wires going from me to him, and he is gonna wake up in 9 months, but until then I have to stay here in the hospital with my body connected to his. I wake up in this scenario. Am I legally obligated to stay there and support his life? Like, what if my body is turned into a life support machine for 9 months? I'm not legally obligated to get up and or to stay there. Like, I should be legally allowed to say, well, no, I don't want to stay here, and basically in the most salient form of this, like, being enslaved to this person who I don't know, I haven't met. That's my bodily autonomy says you don't have the right to make my body into a life support machine. And it's the same thing with pregnancy, don't you see? That is the only logically consistent argument on the pro-abortion side. The problem with it, where it breaks down on logical consistency, is with its coherence to reality, correspondence to reality. The fact is, at the very least, in 99% of cases, you didn't just wake up with your body attached to somebody else. There was a series of events that led up to that scenario, and you are responsible for those events as well, which we'll get to in just a minute. But here she sketches out that view, that the argument is just bodily autonomy. I'm going to back it up so you can hear the whole thing together.
It's about the baby that's being killed. So do you have an answer for that, or are we just denying the humanity of the baby?
No, absolutely. So when you put up a scenario of trying to put out a hit with the mafia, you are talking about murdering a born, living, conscious, sentient, autonomous person. When we talk about abortion, we are talking about ending a non-autonomous life. You do not have the right to bodily autonomy if you are not autonomous. And if you are a fetus prior to the limit of viability, you do not have autonomy. Therefore, you do not have the right to bodily autonomy.
This is a great point.
You reside inside of the body of an autonomous person, and the right to bodily autonomy allows you to refuse to use your body to support the life of another person.
All right, so you hear the argument. It's the exact same, like I just said, the analogy of the waking up in a hospital room. Specifically, something you said, that you do not have the right to bodily autonomy if you are not autonomous, and if a fetus is prior to viability, if you are a fetus prior to the limit of viability, you no longer have you do not have autonomy. I need to point out something here. I am a huge proponent of individual liberty. In case you didn't know, in case this is your first episode with me, yeah, I talk about liberty a lot. Freedom, individual liberty is kind of the core bedrock piece of really, in my opinion, the Christian view of government, and the only consistent way to make decisions about how we should govern ourselves. That is not, individual liberty is not the same thing as autonomy. Let me be really clear on that. There is only one autonomous being in existence. Autonomy means, to commit the root word fallacy, it comes from Greek words. autos meaning he or the self, and nomos meaning law, meaning I rule myself. Self-law is what autonomy is. And I find it almost comical that the one consistent, the best argument from the pro-abort side is, I'm in charge, I make the rules. It's just Genesis 3. It's always just Genesis 3. I want to be God. I want to live in a reality. I want to be the creator of the reality instead of living in the reality that you created, God. You don't get to say what is good and what is evil. I see that the tree of fruit of knowledge of good and evil, and I say that it's good for food, able to make one wise, like you. Like, I get to call the shots on what's good and evil. I get to rule myself, God. You don't get to rule me. Bodily autonomy does not exist. You don't have the right to bodily autonomy. You do have the right to individual liberty, and those are two different things. Michael does a pretty good counter of this by pointing out a flaw in the whole bodily autonomy argument. It's not the best counter in my opinion. The best counter is you don't have the right to bodily autonomy, period. Like, no, you don't have a right to kill a baby, and you don't have the right to bodily autonomy. What's your next argument? But he does a decent job of deflecting here.
So this is a precise and important point you've made. You've acknowledged that abortion ends a life, but you've said, those were your exact words, you just said that the life is not autonomous. Would you say that a 2-day-old post-birth baby is autonomous?
And it's a good counter-argument to highlight a problem with this from an acceptability point of view. Notice what I said at the top of the show. This is the most logically coherent argument. It is reprehensible on a moral level. It's just, like I just said, it's just a statement of Genesis 3. It's just the sin nature, almost in exactly those terms. But for people who don't really grasp that high-minded sort of philosophical, theological basis of autonomy and self-law and what the sin nature is, if that's your argument, born babies are not autonomous either. So if your only argument is something dependent on me I have the right to kill, you have to say that children really up through 3, 4, 5, 6, in some cases, unfortunately, 18 years old, you have the right to kill. That's where this argument necessarily has to go. You are, and well, I'll play and then I'll bring up that point.
It has bodily autonomy, and its body system is able to function autonomously. Yes.
The baby can feed itself?
You are trying to get to the point where they require external resources, but any person can provide that infant external resources. The utilization of someone's internal organs is very different from providing external resources.
So she deflects a little bit. She's like, yes, well, that baby, after it's born, it's got autonomous systems. And Michael rightly says, oh, the baby can feed itself? Like, no, of course this baby is not autonomous. Nobody's autonomous. But, I mean, the baby is dependent upon the mother still. And she just obfuscates. But the reality is you are legally currently liable if a baby dies on your watch. If you are a parent, you are legally responsible for keeping that baby alive, well fed. You can be put in jail for neglect. That's the reality. The baby has rights to your body. The baby has the right to enslave you for many, many years into the future because you are that baby's parent. And she says, oh, well, somebody else can provide those external resources. Any person can provide external resources to that infant. Yes, but the woman or the man, the parent, still has to actually arrange for those. Right? If you just throw a baby in the dumpster and it's proven that you just threw a baby in the dumpster, you're still on the hook for murder, infanticide. You are not allowed to just shirk your responsibility. Rights come with responsibilities. Causes have effects. And so unfortunately, Michael lets this go, and he needed to drill into it a little bit more. I'll back it up so you can hear. He just says that's fine, and he shouldn't let her get away with that. You absolutely, the baby does have a right to your body, and that's just an obfuscation, Bronte. You have to actually deal with the legal reality as it is. Are you also saying that women can and should be allowed to dump babies in dumpsters without arranging external resources or whatever? Or are you saying that the baby has a right to force a woman to make arrangement for provision of those external resources, to use your language?
To function autonomously, yes.
The baby can feed itself?
You are trying to get to the point where they require external resources, but any person can provide that infant external resources. The utilization of someone's internal organs is very different from providing external resources. You cannot force someone to be a parent and provide external resources. You can give up that child at any point that you stop consenting to your parental responsibilities and your parental rights.
Okay, that's fine. So we've acknowledged now that the baby is living in the womb or outside the womb. It's a living being, and that the baby is not really autonomous. I mean, maybe it has. It's not attached by an umbilical cord, but it certainly doesn't have autonomy when it's 2 days old. It needs to eat. It needs everything taken care of for it. What you're saying is, though, once the umbilical cord has been severed, the baby can be taken care of by someone else. So then my question is, why would we not merely encourage adoption? If the mother feels she can't take care of the baby, why not just give up the baby for adoption rather than killing the baby in the womb?
So before her answer, I actually think that this was a poor tactic. Like I said, he basically floats it as like this, why not encourage adoption? Well, no. Why not legally require adoption? There is no middle ground here. And allowing this road of, well, what about adoption, actually distracts from the main issue, which is you're killing a baby. But we'll listen to what she says.
Because pregnancy in itself is a very serious medical condition that has physical, mental, emotional, and financial burdens for the pregnant person.
So you allowed her to make the emotional appeal, which is the heart of all of the other non-logical arguments that aren't the bodily autonomy argument. You allowed her to galvanize the pro-abort side of this issue with an appeal to, don't you feel sorry for the mother who's pregnant? Right. Well, whether or not I feel sorry for the mother who's pregnant is a completely separate issue from whether or not you're allowed to kill the baby.
Very serious medical condition that has physical, mental, emotional, and financial burdens for the pregnant person.
Yep.
And to force a person to endure that experience against their will is simply immoral, and it's belittling the experience that pregnancy is.
Did you hear all of those? Like I said, she's very articulate and she speaks very fast. Did you hear the inconsistency? I will read to you what she said. To force a person to endure that experience against her will, or excuse me, against their will, because we're against their will, is simply immoral. And it's belittling to the experience that pregnancy is. Two words in there that you should have latched onto. One is simply immoral. You're going to argue from simple morality? Really? Really? Your position is we can kill babies. Your position is it's simply moral to rip off babies' limbs and suck their brains out through tubes, but it's simply immoral to force someone to be pregnant. And there's the other thing. So just to point out the double standard, right? Well, no, you don't get to appeal to, quote, simply immoral. Your worldview is so reprehensibly immoral, and you have no basis for morality. But that aside, that's me obfuscating and changing the subject. So let's actually address the point being made. It's not forcing, and it's not against their will. What do I mean? Well, like I said, in the analogy of I just woke up in the hospital and I'm connected to this other person, and do they have the right to my body? Does he have the right to use my body as a life support machine? In the 1% of cases of abortion where that is even remotely analogous, meaning rape. Let's talk about that. Now, I still think that yes, you should still be forced to be pregnant, but let's leave that 1% aside where what you just said is even kind of logically consistent. Nobody forced you to get pregnant. 99% of the abortion cases out there, no one was forced against their will to become pregnant. No one is forcing a person to endure the experience of pregnancy. Every one of the 99%, so 99% of cases, a person chose to engage in activity that would lead to pregnancy. And this is the problem with the abortion debate. This is the problem with actually having the abortion debate, because it cedes so much ground of the Christian worldview on which to stand without discussing. That is, we have to start arguing about sexual morality before we start arguing about abortion. We have to contend for Christian sexual morality if you want to win this argument in the long run. To suggest that a person, to just give up the ground and say, okay, sure, free sex with whoever you want, regardless of how and when and with whom and with how many or whatever, if you give up that ground, then the abortion argument makes some kind of sense. But if you don't give up that ground, all of the arguments fall apart, even this one that we're looking at that is logically consistent. If you're allowed to have sex with whoever you want, if you engage in this sort of some kind of a fantasy that causes don't have effects and effects don't have causes, and that we don't have to live in reality, that sex leads to pregnancy, then yeah, I mean, it makes sense. You just wake up one day and your body is being usurped by some sort of an alien that's living inside of you, or your body is just being forced into. But that's not what's happening. We've given up the ground that some people somehow have this right to free sex, and it's not true. Sex has consequences. Sex leads to pregnancy. And thankfully, Michael points this out. So it's just a remarkable double standard. And you're hearing the language change in real time from unwanted fetus or to unwanted pregnancy. I was like, well, wait a second. No. You made decisions that led to this pregnancy, and you wanted those things that had these effects. You don't get to just pretend that those things didn't exist, that you woke up in a bed with amnesia, and now all of a sudden you're pregnant. I don't know how it happened. Well, everybody else knows how it happened.
Well, so when you say against their will, what you're referring to cases of rape, basically, right?
No,
because when you
consenting-
engage in sex, you are engaging in an act of the will, the consequence of which is, historically speaking, always pregnancy.
Yeah, well put, Michael.
Correct. But when you consent to sex, you're not consenting to pregnancy. You are consenting to the possibility of pregnancy.
Oh, Lord, did you hear? Did you see the gymnastics? That was like a triple backflip somersault split in the air. It's like she literally split into two and then recollided in midair before she landed. What? When you're consenting to sex, when you consent to sex, you're not consenting to pregnancy. You're consenting to the possibility of pregnancy. What sort of fantasy do you live in? This is just delusional. And it's not just in the abortion debate. It's in every element of the leftist worldview. When I consent to eating 2 gallons of ice cream, I'm not consenting to being fat. I'm consenting to the possibility of being fat. And those are two different things, and I don't have to continue consenting to the possibility of being fat, even though I continue to consent to eating all of the ice cream. Well, no, actions have consequences. When I consent to riding in a car, I'm not consenting to the possibility of being injured in a wreck. Well, yeah, you are. Actions have consequences. Reality takes place in time. And when you consent to the, quote, possibility of pregnancy, you're consenting to the, quote, possibility of pregnancy, meaning you don't get to deny the effects and the responsibilities that come with pregnancy. You don't get to kill people to solve your problems. And that's what abortion is. Abortion is killing someone to solve your problem. Your problem is, I want to have free sex, and I don't want to experience any consequences of sex. Well, unfortunately, that's not how sex works. So, you don't get to kill someone to solve your problem. You have to be a grown-up and accept the responsibility that comes with sex. That's the reality. But no, we want to live in a world where we can have our cake and eat it. We want to live in a world where we can, quote, consent to sex, but not consent to the possibility of pregnancy. Those are the same thing. This is also, I mean, another tangent, another episode for another time. This is why I take the view on contraception that I do. Contraception in all cases, not just abortifacient contraception, but I'm pretty much against contraception in all cases. Even I'm even more strict than the Roman Catholic view on this. I'm in the Amish camp of contraception because it's all one consistent worldview. Contraception comes out of the free sex movement, and it comes out of the desire to separate the consequences of sex from the act of sex. But another tangent, another episode for another time. Yes, I am completely backwards and Amish. Send your hate mail. I would love it. We'll continue here.
You're referring to cases of rape, basically, right?
No.
Because
When
you engage in sex, you are engaging in an act of the will, the consequence of which is, historically speaking, always pregnancy.
Correct. But when you consent to sex, you're not consenting to pregnancy. You are consenting to the possibility of pregnancy. But you can think of it like this. You understand the difference between consensual sex and sexual assault. You should then understand the difference between wanted pregnancy and unwanted pregnancy. Technically, physically, they are the same thing. But when your body is being used against your will and without your consent, those are very different experiences for the person.
But
false analogy. You understand the difference between consensual sex and rape, right? Yeah, I do. Well, you should understand the difference between consensual pregnancy and unconsensual pregnancy, or as she phrased it, wanted pregnancy and unwanted pregnancy. No, not really. What you want in the situation, sure, those are parallel, but nothing else is. So, objection, coherence.
Okay, you've just acknowledged that when you consent to sex, you are consenting to the possibility of pregnancy. So there you have it. There you are. You have consented to that. Now, you might not want to become pregnant. You might want to use all sorts of contraceptives and things like that. But surely, I mean, you've just said it yourself. You are consenting to that possibility. And so now you're telling me that if one...
And you hear him just like, you're trying to create some sort of a distinction between these two things, but you just said it yourself. You're consenting to the possibility. Like, what talking you?
Wants to then withdraw one's consent because one doesn't want to be uncomfortable for some matter of months.
And that is one of his weaker moments. He can't help the smug from creeping in. Summarizing pregnancy as being uncomfortable for a matter of months is a weak part. He shouldn't have done that. He knows that, but he just couldn't resist it. And then it again allows her to dig in and make another emotional appeal.
You're saying that the better alternative is to just kill the baby, whom you have acknowledged is alive?
First of all, calling pregnancy simply discomfort is belittling the experience. But you can also think of it like
beautiful
this.
and miraculous too, but it's also uncomfortable.
Says the white man who will never experience it.
Okay, yeah, the smug condescension on all sides. Also, just another sidetrack. Did you notice the blatant racism? I know that we're supposed to just ignore racism when it happens towards white people. Imagine race is reversed. If somebody had uttered the sentence, says the black man who will never have to experience it, it'll be like, wait a second, what does his race, what does the skin color have to do with any of this? Why did race even enter her mind? Because she's racist. That's what she views the world through a prism of race, along with a couple of other completely unbiblical prisms. We have to start calling racism, and so when you hear it in the middle of a debate, you should make note of it. Unfortunately, Michael takes the wrong bait here. He latches onto man, which I agree with the joke, and I think it's absolutely correct to point out the inconsistency. I just think it wasn't the best thing in the middle of the argument. What he does is he takes the bait on the white man comment, and he says, "Well, wait a second, man, what about this is a woman's issue, but I thought men could get pregnant."
See, simply discomfort is belittling the experience, but you can
No,
also
it's
think of it
it's
like
beautiful
this.
and miraculous too, but it's also uncomfortable.
Says the white man who will never experience it.
But
Bronte, you can think of it. No, so
I thought that can men become pregnant or no?
If you have a uterus.
A man with a uterus can.
Michael?
So
because if you don't have a uterus, then you're not the men with a.
Well, look, I'm not a biologist, so I'm not sure if I'll become pregnant. I do have a little emoji that tells me that these days men can become pregnant.
He holds up a picture of the pregnant man emoji, which is another thing. This woman is in third-year medical school, and she just said, yes, men with uteruses can become pregnant. That should scare you. That should really scare you. This woman will be a medical doctor unless someone comes to their senses and prevents her from it. The fact that she speaks out of two sides of her mouth that are on opposite ends of the earth at this point, of this is all a women's issue, and also she can't deny, because it has to be part of her worldview, that men with uteruses can become pregnant, and that's how she has to frame it in order to deflect Michael's deflection. All a bunch of smug back and forth that's not really important. They get into a little detour about statistics and trying to cite statistics, and she basically goes to the old, well, those statistics aren't reliable, and you have to understand. And she does it very eloquently. She very, very eloquently says, the statistics you cite are bad, and the statistics I cite are good, and you're just not allowed to cite any statistics. She is very eloquent at it. It's a little bit of a detour and not really worth playing, but we'll pick up here. Michael does a good job of setting up this final question, which is where he should have been going much earlier in this debate.
Statistics are collected.
Okay, fair enough. So you're saying you don't believe these statistics that are inconvenient, but you say you have perfectly good reason not to believe the statistics. I suppose the question, though, is really beyond the statistics, isn't it? If you are acknowledging, Bronte, that the baby is alive, if you are acknowledging that the baby could be given up for adoption, if you are acknowledging that instances of rape are, I think we can acknowledge they're quite rare, at least when we're talking about, even if you dispute some of the statistics, they're the exception, not the rule. If you are acknowledging all sorts of if you are acknowledging the relatively low maternal mortality rate, if you are acknowledging the advancements in science, if you are acknowledging that very, very few women die every year from illegal abortions and all sorts of the other scare statistics that come out, if you're acknowledging all of those numbers, even beyond that, don't we still have the fact of the baby? Don't we still have the non-utilitarian, non-statistical simple fact that you're talking about a living human being?
Excellent setup. Excellent statement. Yes, good. This is where you have to keep the argument. All of the fancy philosophical arguments about bodily autonomy and consequentialism and utilitarianism and ends just whatever or fetus not. No, keep the argument as this is a human baby. You don't have the right to kill it. The anti-abortion side is morally right in this. All you have to do is consider the baby. Do you have the right to kill a baby to solve your problems? Do you have the right to kill a baby to solve your problems? The answer is no. No, you don't have the right to kill a baby to solve your problems. All of the attendant consequences and circumstances and realities of life and the terrible, hard life that's going to come, all of it's irrelevant to the simple moral question, you don't have the right to kill a baby to solve your problems. And she does not have an answer for that. They never have an answer for that, which is why she has to deflect with mortality rates. So I'll play a little bit of his tee up again.
Don't we still have the fact of the baby? Don't we still have the non-utilitarian, non-statistical simple fact that you're talking about a living human being?
No. So first off, you said that we have a low mortality rate, which
Yeah.
actually we have one of the highest maternal mortality rates amongst all of the developed countries.
But it's still quite low. What is the maternal mortality rate according to the CDC?
I don't know it off the top of my head. I simply
20 out
know
of
that
20 out of 100,000. And
That was spot on. That's something you have to have in debate. You got to have your stats ready, and the fact that he was able to cite it according to the CDC and be like, yeah, deflection. Now, what he should have done right after that, right after citing 20 out of 100,000, but answer the question. Don't we have to consider that this is a baby, right? Because her first thing is deflection. It's, well, I can't answer that question, so I'll try and pick apart some little thing that is kind of inconsequential that was part of your tee up to the real question. And he should have gone right back to the same question. He doesn't.
that includes communities that do not have very good public health outcomes because of various behaviors and pathologies in the community. So it's relatively quite low. How many women died from illegal abortion the year before Roe versus Wade?
I'm not sure, but that's besides the point.
39.
See, and he should have been the one who was able to say that's besides the point. He should have said 20 out of 100,000, but that's besides the point. Do you have the right to kill the baby? And instead, the way that he detoured and went to women's deaths before Roe v. Wade, it allowed her to make the point of that's besides the point. Well, yeah, it is besides the point. The point is there's a baby. Are you allowed to kill it?
Women. How many women died from legal abortion the year before Roe versus Wade?
I think what you're
24
misunderstanding is that death is not the only negative outcome of pregnancy. Just because you don't die does not mean that your life and your body is not impacted for the rest of your life, because a lot of people are left with chronic pain and your body is functionally and structurally altered. And so death is not the most accurate statistic to determine whether or not pregnancy is a negative experience.
And again, it should have been, okay, that's great. That's beside the point. Do you have the right to kill a baby to avoid those negative outcomes?
There we go. So we move past the question of death and we say, well, really, forget about death for a second. It's just that it's very uncomfortable. And not only uncomfortable for 9 months, it might be uncomfortable for the rest of your life, or it might change your body chemistry. It might change the way you look, or it might change. Is any of that, Bronte, I'll leave you with this because I know we're way over the time. Is any of that an argument? Now that we've kind of chipped away, I think at least, it's up for the viewers to decide, chipped away at the constitutional argument or the legal argument or the statistical argument or the argument for mortality. Now we get down to, well, I just don't like what it does to my body. Is that an argument, Bronte, for killing a human being who you admit is alive?
Absolutely. Everyone has the right to determine the status of their body. They have the right to decide when and how their body is used. And if you would like to go back to, I know that you've had a lot to say about vaccines and masks, so I don't think it's very confusing for you to understand when you are concerned about certain effects that certain things might have on your body. Someone has every right to decide whether or not they consent to that.
There you go. All of that stripped away. Do you have the right to kill a baby? Yes, absolutely. That's what she said. Now, she cloaked it in lots of very fancy rhetoric, cloaked it in bodily autonomy. You have the right to decide what, quote, medical procedures will be performed upon you. No, do you have the right to kill a baby to solve your problem? And her answer is yes. That's where you have to keep the argument, and that's where the bodily autonomy argument has to go, and you have to expose it for the moral atrocity that it is. It is the only logically consistent argument for abortion, and it is morally atrocious. He said something in there that I appreciated. I wish that he would take to heart, which is that the audience will decide. He did a very good job in this debate. I think any impartial person who's watching that, who thinks even kind of cogently and actually listens to the words each of them are saying, you have to come out on Michael's side on that debate. But both of them engage in the smug, dismissive, patronizing, just garbage that makes a lot of this, that makes me wish that they would both stop and just engage with the arguments, which they almost did. We are going to wrap up the meat segment there and move into my 3 favorite news stories from the last week, more or less.
It's my 3 favorite news stories from the last week.
More or less. Maybe I should add that. just add it right at the end. I'll think about that. The first one is something that I recorded about 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to cut to where my voice will sound different and the mic will sound different. I recorded this a while ago, and I didn't really know where to put it, and I think it fits into 3 Favorite News Stories. So before we get into the whole leaked abortion decision about Roe v. Wade, there was an interview that Megan Fox did with Glamour, and so I'm going to just play you what I recorded a few weeks ago. You'll deal with the jump cut, and then we'll pick back up with 3 Favorite News Stories after this. So take a listen. Now, if you don't know who Megan Fox is, she is a former movie actress, star probably is a fair word, whose main claim to fame was being truly strikingly gorgeous, and that was what she was. She was the kind of the ultimate sex symbol during the Transformer era of her career and a little bit onward, and fell out of the limelight mostly because she started speaking up about sexual abuse in Hollywood, but did it too soon for the Me Too folks to hop on board. But she's back in the spotlight most recently because she got married to a rapper named, obviously not named, but who calls himself Machine Gun Kelly. And this interview details some of the things that go on in their relationship, and what I kind of wanted to do is just take a minute to listen to Megan Fox in her own words and point out some of the slight confusion and hopefully use the confusion that she expresses to provide clarity for others. So let me find the first bit.
I wasn't allowed to be
at about 4 minutes and 7 seconds. She spends about the first 4 minutes talking about, her experience in Hollywood and how she, fell out of the limelight and then came back. And they, the Glamour people edited this after the fact, and they put up the questions that they asked her in text on the screen. So some of the times you got to take these things with a grain of salt because this is edited after the fact. So it's not clear exactly how the progression of words really went. There's jump cuts where we jump from her saying one thing to her saying another thing, and perhaps there were 4 minutes of dialogue in between those two things, and we don't know. So trying to take her and be as fair to her as possible. Still, this is the question that was asked was, do you feel more in control of your own narrative now? And this is what she says.
I'm just so much more grounded, and I identify so much more with, not with my ego, more with my soul. And I'm able to separate a lot of the things that are happening and realize that they're not real. Everything that I experience as a struggle or painful is an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for a lesson, for learning, for transcending. And so my perception is different, my approach is different, and that allows for my experience to be different, obviously.
Even as she's expressing the way she's talking and some of the words she's using, and the transcendent experience and the opportunities for growth, that like half of me agrees. It's like, that's good. That's good that you're growing in a way and you feel a bit more grounded. But at the same time, the way that you express that you feel grounded is really a lack of a grasp on reality. Let's listen again and kind of pause as we go.
Grounded, and I identify so much more with, not with my ego, more with my soul.
I identify more not with my ego, more with my soul. It sounds like she's using these words in less than popular ways. Sounds like she's using them in some sort of a technical sense. I don't get how you identify with your soul. I guess I agree that you're the immaterial part of you that is intertwined with your material part is something that you should be aware of. You should not deny it. You should quote identify with it insofar as you recognize that it is fallen and needs redemption. So that's a good thing, I suppose.
And I'm able to separate a lot of the things that are happening and realize that they're not real. Everything that I experience.
I'm able to separate a lot of things that are happening and realize that they're not real. I mean, if they're happening, or probably, if they're actually happening, actual means real, right? Like realized. So. Don't really know what you mean.
As a struggle or painful is an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for a lesson, for learning, for transcending. And
okay, for the first part of that, it's like, yes, absolutely. Struggle, pain are opportunities for growth. This is the old Christian doctrine of being perfected through pain, to quote C.S. Lewis. Yes, the experiences you have in this life should point you towards the transcendent reality of the immortal God who is perfect. But you just said an opportunity for transcending, which we don't really do, at least not in this life. And again, it's like you're using words that kind of make me think either you don't know what you're talking about, or I don't know what you're talking about, or both.
so my perception is different, my approach is different, and that allows for my experience to be different, obviously.
She kind of trails off, and it sounds almost like she's drugged, which it turns out later in the interview we find out, yeah, she probably is. Part of her new experience that is helping her deal with reality or something or other. This next part is the part that got the most play, which probably rightly so. There's the question that pops up on the screen that is it true that you and Machine Gun Kelly drank each other's blood? And that sparks this response.
I guess drank each other's blood might mislead people, or like people are imagining us with like goblets and we're like Game of Thrones drinking each other's blood. It's just a few drops, but yes, we do consume each other's blood on occasion for ritual purposes.
It's just a few drops, and we consume each other's blood on occasion it's just for ritual purposes. She gives that little hands up like, don't worry, and nods the head back and forward like, it's not a big deal. It's just for ritual purposes. That makes it worse, Megan. It's for, quote, ritual purposes. It wasn't like, oh, you got a paper cut, and what do you do when you get a paper cut and a little bead of blood? You put your finger in your mouth and stop it. No, it wasn't something like that. It was ritual purposes. Hold the phone. That's not good. That is extremely disordered.
Only. It is used for a reason, and it is controlled where it's like, let's shed a few drops of blood and each drink it. He's much more haphazard and hectic and chaotic, where he's willing to just like cut his chest open with broken glass and be like, take my soul. Again,
That's not good. What you realize is if you watch this interview, which I don't know if I suggest, only if you are definitely in a good grounded headspace should you maybe listen to this video in its entirety. You realize that this woman is extremely broken and in a traumatic codependent relationship where they are both abusing each other and dependent on each other's abuse to continue their meager existence. And that's really where this comes out. You're talking about a guy who is cutting his chest open haphazardly, as you put it, with broken glass, and literally saying, "Take my soul." Again, that is extremely disordered. That is not good or okay. And the fact that you can't see that is itself a tragedy. The fact that your worldview has become so perverted by this sinful world and by your own sinful desires that you can't see the disorder and the dysfunction and the evil that is itself sad. And on a theological note, the question of consuming each other's blood, I mean, the Bible is very clear. Things life is in its blood. And so the fact that he's saying, and it seems like this is in some kind of a joking way, like, take my soul. But that's got a grain of theological truth to it. That's why it's wrong. is because by consuming another person's blood, you are consuming that person's life, and that person has life and should live it. And you're symbolically and perhaps in some sort of a spiritual sense saying that your life is dominant and you should consume another person's life and subsist upon it, that their existence is subservient to your own, and that their life is not as important as yours, and that you should take it for your own perseverance of life. And that's not good. Again, that is disordered, and that is evil. Some of this becomes a bit clearer when she starts talking about a trip that the two of them took to I think it was Peru. So we'll play that portion here.
They're like this. This is a very intense relationship, and it's cyclical, and so it gets to these points where like we have to do cleansings.
Okay, listen to that introduction first of all. This is a very intense relationship, and it's cyclical, and it gets to the point where we have to do cleansings. Yeah, that's not a healthy relationship. The concept of a relationship being cyclical, again, depending on what you mean by that, okay. Like there are times where my relationship with my wife are going to be closer and more intimate, and times where we're going to be more distant. And recognizing that it's not always going to be the same as our honeymoon, or it's not always going to be the same as our worst fight, right? Recognizing that there are ebbs and flows to human relationships. Okay, that's fine. But when you say it's cyclical and it comes to this point where it needs cleansing, and what she means by cleansing, as you'll find out, is, again, very disordered.
This is a very intense relationship, and it's cyclical, and so it gets to these points where like we have to do cleansings. I had gotten to a point where I was like, we need an adrenaline injection of God in this relationship. And so we went to Costa Rica, and we had
an adrenaline injection of God in this relationship. Basically, our relationship has gotten so bad that we have to go and abuse God for our own purposes to fix our little human problems. But more so, we need to treat God as this genie in a bottle, or in this case, in a pipe. Their answer is go to Costa Rica and take psychotropic drugs together from Strawman. So I'll let her speak for herself through the end of this section, then we'll go back and play segments.
To a point where I was like, we need an adrenaline injection of God in this relationship. And so we went to Costa Rica, and we had Peruvian shamans who administered the ayahuasca. And we each went in with different questions that we wanted the medicine to answer for us.
Ayahuasca is a psychotropic drug, and the medicine, quote unquote, that you are seeking answers from. Sorry, I said I was going to let her play. So it's a psychotropic drug, in case you didn't know what ayahuasca is. And
it was incredibly intense. The whole experience, like the fasting leading up to it, the diet changes, you're not allowed to drink water after 5 p.m., you are in the middle of the jungle. And I had my questions and my goals, and then he went and he sat to be given his ayahuasca, and everybody else was being given 1 glass of ayahuasca because it was our first night. And the shaman says something in her native language, and then the interpreter is like, we need to give you 3 doses because you have such a dark, sad spirit standing behind you, like an actual like demonic spirit hovering over him. To no one's surprise, anyone that knows him, we're all like, no, when I tell that story, nobody's like, oh my God, everybody's like, and then what? Because we all know that. It bound us together in a way, like that's an experience that such a few amount of people have in general, to do it together as a couple. And then also our journey that we were doing, it was affecting the other couples, the other people who were there. So it was prophetic in a lot of ways, and it confirmed a lot of things for us that I needed to know or I needed to feel. It opened a door for a lot of healing for me from a personal experience I had had with him, that allowed us to get to a place where we were now seeking the right outlets to heal moving forward, if that makes sense.
All right, we're gonna go back and we're gonna go back and listen to some of this. Pick up right about there.
Affecting the other couples,
A little bit earlier.
and everybody else, and that we wanted the medicine to answer for us. And it was incredibly intense. The whole experience, like the fasting leading up to it, the diet changes, you're not allowed to drink water after 5 p.m., you are in the middle of the jungle. And I had my questions and my goals, and then he went and he sat to be given his ayahuasca, and everybody else was being given 1 glass of ayahuasca because it was our first night. And the shaman...
Everybody else was being given 1 glass of psychotropic drugs, and we were given one glass because it was our first night. Meaning, the whole point of this is you get more and more tripped out, more and more removed from reality, and supposedly this gives you some sort of a grounded perspective. And the person actually says, the person says, you've got demons tormenting you. You need extra psychotropic drugs to be freed from them. I do believe that demons exist, and I do believe that that they can torment people. And I, like she says in this, she tells people that story, and the part about the demon tormenting this person makes everybody go, and then what? And it's not crazy at all. Because everyone ultimately does believe in the supernatural, and everyone ultimately does believe that God exists and that demons exist. And it's not hard to come to the conclusion that somebody who looks and acts like a Machine Gun Kelly is being plagued by them. Those are the sensational ones. Those are the ones that are easy to pick out. Now, there are other people who are being plagued by demons who don't give off as much of a clear vibe, and that's part of the deception, I think. But I'm willing to believe, actually, that he actually is being tormented by demons and even possibly possessed by one. And the response to that is not to detach from reality more and allow the demon to have more control over you. What a foolish response. How sad. It made me, listening to this made me very sad for Megan Fox. What else does she say?
The whole experience, like the fasting leading up to it, the diet changes, you're not allowed to drink water after 5 p.m., you are in the middle of the jungle. And I had my questions and my goals, and then he went and he sat to be given his ayahuasca, and everybody else was being given 1 glass of ayahuasca because it was our first night. And the shaman says something in her native language, and then the interpreter is like, we need to give you 3 doses because you have such a dark, sad spirit standing behind you, like an actual like demonic spirit hovering over him. To no one's surprise, anyone that knows him, we're all like, no, when I tell that story, nobody's like, oh my God, everybody's like, and then what?
And also part of this, the flip side of that might not be that everybody believes in the supernatural so much that they actually believe that and they recognize that Machine Gun Kelly is plagued by a spirit. It might be that you get to this point where you're just like, you're hearing this woman talk, and you feel so sad for her that you're very hesitant to correct her because she is so clearly on such a delicate edge that if the possibility of upsetting her worldview could completely demolish her psyche, and she would probably become suicidal. And so probably her friends are going, and then what? Like trying to be sympathetic and not rock the boat because it's about to tip. Perhaps that's the other part of the explanation there. But again, notice the piece of truth mixed in with the lies. The fasting, that's a good biblical practice. The seeking answers. Again, that's a good thing that Christians should do. Now we should turn to the text of Scripture, and we should turn to prayer to our God to find these answers, and the church to find answers to these questions. We shouldn't turn to psychotropic drugs administered by shaman, but this is how the enemy works. And then she talks about how this event bound us together. This is where you get the codependent trauma really clearly.
Because we all know that. It bound us together in a way. Like, that's an experience that such a few amount of people have in general, to do it together as a couple. And then also our journey that we were doing, it was affecting the other couples, the other people who were there.
We abused our own bodies to such a degree that we came near to death by imbibing psychotropic drugs together, that we were united by the trauma of our own self-abuse, and thus abused each other by clinging to each other through the experience. That's the translation of what she's saying. Again, it makes me marvel at God's grace that he would allow me to have the experiences in the life that I have had, and it makes me weep for the people who have denied the gifts of God to such an extent that this is where they'll turn it. I can't turn to plain old-fashioned Christianity. Can't go to that old Bible that's been sitting there for 2,000 years. I gotta go to the Peruvian shaman with the psychotropic drugs. And then she says something that really, okay, here's where it becomes clear. Actually, they're in a physically abusive relationship, and she is dependent. She is an abuse victim, currently dependent upon her abuser, which, go figure, they're drinking each other's blood. I could have told you that, because she just said earlier in the interview that he abuses her by splitting his chest open and telling her to drink his soul. But she says this, which indicates that there's probably other instances of abuse.
So it was prophetic in a lot of ways, and it confirmed a lot of things for us that I needed to know or I needed to feel. It opened a door for a lot of healing for me from a personal experience I had had with him.
Opened a door for a lot of healing from a personal experience I'd had from him. Yeah, that's coded language for this guy used to beat me, and this gave me the coping mechanism to deal with it. This is exactly what you hear from women who are stuck in the porn industry, who turn to drugs and alcohol to deal with the sexual abuse of selling their bodies and doing pornography. This is what's going on in her relationship, and she does not call it that because she's currently in the cycle of abuse.
That allowed us to get to a place where we were now seeking the right outlets to heal moving forward, if that makes sense.
No, it doesn't make sense, Megan. These are the words of a deeply broken and battered person. So my call is pray for Megan Fox. Pray for Machine Gun Kelly. Pray that they would both repent of their sin. Turn to the giver of life. That is their only hope. That is their only hope in this life and the next. May God have mercy. May God have mercy. So moving on from Megan Fox, obviously the major news story from the last week was the leaked Supreme Court decision about that. It seems like it's going to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's Dodds, I believe. I'm going completely off from memory here because I didn't intend to actually talk too much about the leak. The reality is that somebody leaked a full draft of the majority opinion of the case that will overturn Roe v. Wade prior to the majority opinion being finalized, the final vote taken, and it being released as an opinion of the court. That's never happened before. That should outrage a lot of people for a lot of reasons. That said, since it shouldn't have happened, I'm not going to engage with the leaked decision. I'm just going to take the opportunity to speak about abortion and why it's a morally reprehensible thing that should be illegal. Now, I think it should be illegal in the same way that murder is illegal, and the way that works in our system is it's done on the state level. Turns out that this decision will return the question of abortion to the state level. Works for me. That aside, all of the reactions are the news stories that kind of like wrap up into one. So the third favorite news story is Eric Swalwell of Fartgate fame. If you don't remember Eric Swalwell, he was the guy who tried to run for president and had the slogan, "I am you." And surprise, surprise, it didn't resound with people. It didn't resonate. He also is well known for this, probably the best 8 seconds of TV news ever. It was this on MSNBC with what's his name? I forget who was interviewing it. It doesn't matter. Here's the 8 seconds.
The evidence is uncontradicted that the president used taxpayer dollars to ask the Ukrainians to help him cheat an election. And the complaint that I've heard from...
Oh, it never gets old. Oh, it never gets old. And he didn't just be like, yeah, I passed gas on air. Sorry, guys. Laugh at myself and move on. Nope. No, he didn't. It was a cup sliding across the thing. It was interference in the microphone. No, you passed gas. Everybody does it. Just let it go, which you did. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. Anytime Swalwell's name comes up, I have to remind everyone of that glorious 8 seconds of TV history. In response to Roe v. Wade, I think his tweet summarizes the response the best. He tweeted, "The Republicans won't stop with banning abortion. They want to ban interracial marriage. Do you want to save that? Well, then you should probably vote." This tweet perfectly encapsulates all of the other arguments for abortion. He listed all of the other logically consistent arguments for abortion there in the tweet. Did you hear them all? The Republicans won't stop with banning abortion. They want to ban interracial marriage. Do you want to save that? Well, then you should probably vote. Yeah, because they're not there. It does reveal, though, on top of listing all, like, there are tons of tweets out there, like almost every tweet out there lists all of the other good or other logical arguments in favor of abortion. But this one reveals the leftist mindset, which is racism. It's always what I mean. That's all you that you heard it in the Bronte, what's her name quote, like she had to call him a white man, couldn't just call him a man who couldn't get pregnant. It's a white man because you have to view everything in the prism of race. And when you don't have an argument, you just shout racism. Right? I think he's racist. He must be doing. He wants to ban abortion. That must mean that he's racist. They want to ban interracial marriage next. Yeah, I mean, when you try to connect those dots, I think your pen will run out of ink. But I guess go with that. Run with it. I'm sure that it's going to pan out well for you. The tagline, Republicans won't stop banning abortion. They want to ban interracial marriage. Go vote. Sounds like it's right on par with all of your other political campaign slogans, Eric. So those are the 3 news stories. Megan Fox, the Alito decision, and the Democrat response summarized by Eric Swalwell's tweet. We'll move on to Twitface.
And it looks as though we're in for a splendid afternoon sport on this, the 127th Upper Class Twit of the Year show. And there's a big crowd here today to see these prize idiots in action.
Twitface today is kind of unrelated. It's an ad that came across my Facebook newsfeed. But it's kind of related with the whole, in reality, actions have consequences. And the thing that this ad that popped up on my Facebook feed was for a company called Found, and the headline of this blog post that they were advertising to advertise their product. Here's the headline: Obesity is a disease, not a decision. Fact check. False. Obesity, rather, fact check, true. It's not a decision. It's the consequence of many decisions. Still, I think the point you're making is fact check, false. Obesity, in the vast majority of cases, I have to say, we're always dealing with the vast majority of cases until we're specifically talking about the edge cases. That's why they're edge cases. But in the vast majority of cases, obesity is a decision. The first two paragraphs of their blog post. For decades, we've all been told that our weight is the result of a simple calculation. Calories in need to be less than calories out. That calculation, however, is inaccurate and outdated. I agree that there's more nuance to it than that, but it does kind of boil down to that. If you eat fewer calories than you expend, you will lose weight. That's true. Now, how you go about doing that, yeah, okay, let's get some nuance, but I don't like where this is going. At Found, we use a science-based approach that treats obesity as a disease, not as the result of personal decisions. But you use a science-based approach. Science, I've said this before, science is observing cause and effect relationships and writing down the effects. That's all science is. Science is observable, testable, and repeatable. You set up a test, you set up these conditions, you say, I initiated this cause and this was the effect, and then I changed one variable and I initiated the cause and this was the effect, and then I noticed that if I changed all of these other variables, this is the one variable that seems to elicit this effect, and you do that over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and eventually you come to the conclusion that these certain things have certain effects. And guess what? The cause and effect relationship in obesity is you eat a bunch, you personally decide to eat a bunch, you're going to get fat. Found we use a science-based approach that treats obesity as a disease, not as the result of personal decisions. This approach has the power to completely change the way we think about weight and health. This mindset motivates Found's uniquely holistic approach to weight care. Instead of blindly accepting the calorie in, calorie out mantra that dominates the market today, we at Found approach weight care from a medical, science-first point of view. Our doctors are experts in the biology of weight care. They'll take the time to understand your particular situation and prescribe the right medications for you if you're eligible. We also understand that effective weight care requires a holistic approach, so their answer is pills. This is something that I've thought a lot about. I heard Matt Walsh talk about it, and I was like, hey, cool, and somebody else is thinking about this the same way that I am. We have medicalized everything in order to obfuscate responsibility. We are really trying to eliminate the entire existence of cause and effect responsibility for actions from society. Something as basic as if you overeat repeatedly, you will get fat. We are trying to prescribe a pill and do away with it. If we just give it a medical sounding name, if we put it in Latin roots, that gives it this all cloud that makes it like we don't have to deal with it. It's just a condition that I'm not responsible for. No, you're responsible for it. You ate an entire cake every day of the week for a year. That's why you weigh what you do. And I'm sorry that I have to engage in the extremely crass and straightforward tough love sort of language, but you're forcing my hand with this extremely damaging, nothing is your fault sort of language. This concept of you can obfuscate responsibility for every single one of your decisions. I've said before, I struggle with my weight. It is a constant battle. I work out a lot because I'm not the kind of person who has a natural metabolism that just makes the pounds melt off. I have to watch what I eat. And if I go a couple of days without watching what I eat, the number on the scale goes up. Imagine my surprise when I overeat multiple meals in a row, and then a couple days later I'm fatter. I can't explain it. It must be a disease. Give me a pill. Give me a pill and we'll solve it. And of course, they try to backpedal a little bit by saying, we recognize there's a holistic approach, so we'll pair you with a wellness coach who will help you find a personalized plan for meeting your goals. But I thought it's just a disease. Diseases are solved by giving me medication. Give me medication. Solve the problem. Doesn't matter about, personal responsibility. Just give me the pill. I'll just take the pill. Oh, yeah. This is the world we're headed towards. These are the through lines you have to be able to recognize. The through line of a desire to shirk responsibility. It goes all the way back to the garden. Genesis 3 answers so many questions. You could spend so much time. Genesis 3 really does fully explain our society. The woman you gave me, it's not my fault, God. The disease that I was born with, it's not my fault. Well, you did eat 3 cakes, but it's not my fault, God. No, it is your fault. Accept responsibility for your actions. Repent and believe the gospel. That'd be a great answer to this problem. But unfortunately, nobody wants to do that. We'll move on to Old Man Joe.
And I see like an old man.
The big difference between mostly dead and all dead. Please open his mouth.
Old Man Joe, what you gonna tell me? Old Man Joe, what you gonna say?
All right. Let's get this queued up. Joe had a little bit of a gaffe. We'll call it that. He was on the tarmac answering questions about abortion and a woman's right to choose after all of the news about Alito's decision came out. And he had a little slip when he was answering a question. Again, every time I know eventually I've got to have the last Old Man Joe segment because it makes me feel a little worse every time I do it. But it's just the way he's talking, you can just hear he wants to be asleep right now, and we should let him. But he forgets to engage in the completely insane language manipulation for just a second, and he lets it slip that you're killing a baby, although he uses the phrase abort a child. Listen for it.
Roe says what all basic mainstream religions have historically concluded, that the existence of a human life and being is a question. Is it at the moment of conception? Is it 6 months? Is it 6 weeks? Is it quickening, like Aquinas argued? I mean, so the idea that we're going to make a judgment that is going to say that no one can make the judgment to choose to abort a child based on a decision by the Supreme Court, I think goes way overboard.
Pretty coherent for him. Better than usual. Did you notice, though, that he said no one can make a decision to abort a child? We're not going to allow that. You're allowed to abort a what now? Hang on, Joe. You're not allowed to call it that. That gives up the game. Yeah, if you admit that what you're aborting is a child, that's really immoral. That's evil. The idea that nobody has a right to kill a kid, yeah, that's not really like a question. Nobody has the right to kill a kid. That's the answer to the problem. And yeah, the fact that he let that one slip, I'm sure there were a ton of aides rushing forward. And if that clip continues, you'll see, okay, thank you, that's all. And then a couple of reporters got a couple of extra questions in. Oh, but anyway, this has been Old Man Joe. I really like the bump, so I gotta play it again.
And I see like an old man.
The big difference between mostly dead and all dead. Please open his mouth.
Old Man Joe, what you gonna tell me? Old Man Joe, what you gonna say?
hymn hype today. We're doing one of my favorites. Since Easter was fairly recent, I figured I would talk about one of my favorite Easter hymns, and it might surprise you that one of my favorite Easter hymns is O Come Emmanuel. Most of us tend to think of this song as a Christmas hymn. It is not. It is an Easter hymn. If you just listen to the words, you realize it's an Easter hymn. It's about the advent of the Christ. It's about the longing that he should come, and what we're actually longing for is the second coming. It's the resurrection coming. What's really interesting is if you have ever participated in a Passover Seder, if you sing O Come Emmanuel at the Passover Seder, you'll hear all of these things. It's like, oh, this is what this ceremony is about. We're talking about the Jewish Messiah. It really hits differently in that context. But reading the history of O Come Emmanuel is kind of interesting. So reading from Kenneth Osbeck's 101 Hymn Stories. The hymnal is truly an amazing collection of expressions regarding spiritual truths. It represents the experiences and feelings of people from many religious backgrounds throughout various cultures and periods of history. This hymn, for example, finds its origins in the medieval Roman church of the 12th century and possibly even earlier. It began as a series of antiphons, short statements sung at the beginning of the Psalms or of the Magnificat at Vespers during the Advent season. Each of the antiphons greets the Savior with one of the many titles ascribed to him in the Scriptures: Emmanuel, Lord of Might, Rod of Jesse, Dayspring, Key of David. The hauntingly catchy modal melody for this text was originally a plain song or chant, the earliest form of singing in the church. During the 19th century, there were a number of Anglican ministers and scholars, such as John M. Neal, who developed a keen interest in rediscovering and translating into English many of the ancient Greek, Latin, and German hymns. John Neal, born in London, England, on January 24, 1818, undoubtedly did more than any other person to make available the rich heritage of Greek and Latin hymns. John M. Neal is also the translator of the hymns The Day of Resurrection, All Glory, Laud, and Honor, and Art Thou Weary. Advent beginning for 4 Sundays before Christmas is the season of the church year that emphasizes the anticipation of the first coming of Christ to this earth. His coming as the Messiah was first prophesied in the 6th century BC, when the Jews were captive in Babylon. For centuries thereafter, faithful Hebrews looked for their Messiah with great longing and expectation, echoing the prayer that he would ransom captive Israel. The tragedy of tragedies, however, is the biblical and historical fact that he did come unto his own to establish a spiritual kingdom of both redeemed Jew and Gentile, but his own did not receive him. Today, many hymn books use just 5 of the original statements addressed to the anticipated Messiah. Emmanuel, deliverer. God's people now separated from heaven are here compared to Israel during its Babylonian exile, being separated from God's holy temple in Jerusalem. Lord of Might, this is addressed to Almighty Jehovah, and the one who first gave the law at Mount Sinai to the awesome accompaniment of lightning and thunder, referencing Exodus 19:16. Rod of Jesse, this is a reference to Isaiah 11:1, and there shall come forth a rod of Jesse out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. This prophecy was perfectly fulfilled with the birth of Christ, who came from the kingly line of David, the son of Jesse. Verse 4, Dayspring, this address to the Messiah means literally sun rising. This prophetic reference was re-echoed by the priest Zacharias in these words, upon hearing of Christ's birth, the dayspring from on high has visited us to give light to them that sit in darkness and in the shadow of death. Verse 5 says, Thou key of David. This expression is first recorded in Isaiah 22:22. The key of the house of David will I lay upon his shoulders. And the well-known verse from Isaiah 9:6 also confirms this royal authority of Christ, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. Truly our hearts can rejoice with God's people of all ages when we realize that Christ the Messiah did come 2,000 years ago and accomplished a perfect redemption for Adam's hopeless race, yet we wait with the same urgent expectancy as did the Israelites of old for the piercing of the clouds, his second advent, when victory over sin and death will be final. I would like to encourage people to treat second advent time as Easter time. again, look at the Passover Seder. Everything is about the coming of the Messiah. All of the symbols in the Passover look back at the Exodus and how they foretell the Messiah. I would recommend checking out the script of a Messianic Passover Seder and see how even Christ himself used this meal to talk about how it prophesied of him, his death and resurrection. The expectancy of the Messiah is something that we should sing about. I just think we should be singing about it at Easter time. And O Come O Come Emmanuel is a great song for that. Tim Bouchon, the guy who did the version of the A Mighty Fortress that is the intro bump for Hymn Hype, did a version of O Come Emmanuel that I'm going to play the first few seconds of. You can go find Tim Bouchon on iTunes and YouTube. I like a lot of his covers, particularly his Christmas hymns covers are great, and it is my favorite cover of O Come Emmanuel. We will end the show with this. Yeah, you definitely should go give Tim Bouchon a listen. Bushong. One of my favorite song covers ever is that one. I would love it if you would share this show. If you heard something that you think other people need to hear, if we address arguments the way that you like or think about things, or if you just hate us and you want to hate other people or hate me with other people, make fun of me or whatever. I would love it if you would do so. Share the show. Send it to all of your friends. Do it by word of mouth. Like sit down with coffee with somebody and mention, hey, have you checked out the podcast Reason to Refrain? He actually talks about what you're talking about. Or just blast it all over social media and with email and with snail mail. Write the URL down, reasontorefrain.com, on a piece of paper and mail it to everyone in your... I'm sure you still have a Rolodex with addresses, so go ahead and do that for me, and then send emails back to me to suggest topics, interact with what I've said, correct me, shout insults at me. You can actually record sound bites and send them via email to Steven@reasontorefrain.com. That's Steven, STEPHEN, reasontorefrain, REASONEDREFRAIN.com. Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. You'll hear me next time unless Jesus comes back before then. Reasoned Refrain is produced by Stephen Curto. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are my own and should not be taken as reflective of any institution with which I am associated. Theme song written and performed by J.J. Anderson and Stephen Curto, mastered by J.J. Anderson. Reasoned Refrain is the property of Stephen Curto, all rights reserved.